This is a dual GPU engineering sample of an AMD ATi HD 4870X2 that the company shipped back in 2008. We bought this from a viewer, and although AMD did ship a variant of what this eventually became, we've never seen an engineering sample of it pop up online, and this one's got some interesting differences with it. The retail version of this was the single fastest graphics card when it launched and forced NVIDIA to slash prices of its GTX 280 by $220 and its GTX 260 by $110 to contend with AMD's offerings, according to Tech Report and Anandtech from the time. The release of this dual GPU, or the retail version of it, came at a pivotal moment for AMD, less than 2 years after acquiring ATi and only 2 months before spinning out its foundry business. AMD hadn't yet begun to contend with the aftermath of the Great Recession, because it was the before math, or the middle math, of the Great Recession. The 2008 financial crisis was only really just beginning, and that would kick off 1 month after in greater form when the Lehman Brothers collapsed, a month after the dual GPU launched for AMD. And just to be clear, this didn't cause the Lehman Brothers to collapse. Although in a certain way that would be sort of funny, except for the part where the financial crisis happened, but otherwise it would be funny. AMD's stock was worth about $5 per share in August 2008, falling to $3.50 per share just 2 months later after this card launched, setting it up for failure long term. Following October of 2008, the price plummeted to around $2 per share by February of 2009. The GPU that we're looking at today was part of AMD's last flagship launch before it entered a free fall. It was also around this era that AMD dumped its real estate in the leaseback deal, signaling what almost became a death spiral. So this dual GPU video card that we're working on today, that our viewer found at, I think, was a thrift shop or something like that, this would have launched right at the beginning of a long period of turmoil for AMD, the industry in general, but in particular for AMD, long before Ryzen was ever even someone's idea. That would only come to save AMD nearly a decade later from the launch of this card. We're fortunate enough to have been able to buy this from a viewer. We've actually got a lot of really unique hardware from viewers over the years, so if you find stuff that you think we might find interesting for videos, and you want to loan it to us or sell it to us, you can email our tips line, tips@gamersnexus.net. But our thanks to Muzz for sending this over to us. We bought it from him, and we're going to get started with a teardown of this engineering sample dual GPU card from AMD to see what the differences are from retail and try to get it to turn on. Before that, this video is brought to you by ID Cooling and the Frozen A720 cooler. The A720 air cooler performed well in our testing last year. The A720 is a relatively high-end, dual 140mm air cooler with 7 heat pipes. We found the use of larger fans can be beneficial to acoustic performance given the thermals, although you'll want to check your case for compatibility given the taller nature of the cooler and its fans. ID Cooling uses an all-black look for its A720 and includes mounting hardware for all modern sockets. Learn more at the link in the description below. So we had a lot of trouble getting this card to work. We're going to talk about that in a little bit here. But today what we're focusing on is some of the history of this card, a lot of nostalgia from this era for a lot of people. Personally, I had a system with two 4870s, so they were in Crossfire, and I think it was called the Antec Skeleton. I think it was the big version of the case. They had a mini and a large one. That was my build for that era. I remember playing Battlefield Bad Company, whatever number it was, back shortly after in the 2010-2012 era with those two 4870s. And this is kind of familiar to that, except it's one card and an engineering sample, which I personally could have never dreamed of having back at that time. So we're going to try to get it to boot. We ran into a lot of problems, though. We'll talk about that. This is also a good opportunity, though, for the history and the teardown. Back when AMD's website looked like it cared about gaming rather than using AI to spit out maps about Nebraska and Texla Holmeses during keynotes about AI for education, the company announced its ATi Radeon HD 4870X2. The site feels like a throwback. Gradients used for the buttons on the website, a borderless styling, red and black everywhere, and simple navigation. It was a simpler time. It's a throwback. AMD released the ATi Radeon HD 4870 X2 in August of 2008. Some things don't change apparently, including naming schemes for computer hardware. AMD marketed the card towards what they said were ultra enthusiasts and positioned its $550 dual GPU against NVIDIA's 9800 GX2 and GT200 series lineups. Today, that'd be about $820 with inflation. This followed NVIDIA's famous 8800 GPU series, best known for being able to run Crysis reasonably well. At the time, Anandtech commented, saying, quote, "It looks like NVIDIA's standards have changed, largely thanks to AMD, and now the key players in NVIDIA's lineup are priced more realistically," end quote. AMD's marketing noted that the card had, quote, "unparalleled anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering," end quote, with the Features tab noting DirectX 10.1 support, giving us a timestamp of an era. The officially launched 4870 X2 spec sheet lists a 750 MHz GPU clock, a 900 MHz memory clock, 800 shading units, 40 TMUs, 16 ROPs, 1 GB of GDDR5 memory, and a 256-bit bus width per GPU. And again, that's with 2 GPUs total, so you're getting 2 GB total of GDDR5 across the whole board. The card also has a 286-watt TDP, PCIe 2.0x16 interface, 2 DVI ports, and 1 S-video port for display. Dual GPUs can't access the resources across the GPUs, so these specs are reserved for each GPU individually. Crossfire means that you could put 2 of these together, which would give you 4 GPUs in 2 slots, theoretically. AMD basically took 2 RV770 processors, from what we can tell, from its already released ATi HD 4870 non-X2s. They doubled the memory of each, from 512 MB to 1 GB per GPU, and combined them on a single PCB along with a PLX PCIe switch between the GPUs. Following the same strategy introduced in its HD 3800 series and confirmed by Anandtech of the time, AMD competed at the high end by multiplying its GPUs, effectively planting 2 on the same PCB rather than the traditional approach of using a single flagship GPU at the high end and then cutting it down for variations for the mid-range and maybe low-end market segments, if not spinning out something different entirely. AMD said its strategy was to build perfect solutions for $200 to $300, which would be $300 to $450 today. And he stuck with that strategy later as well, like with the RX 480. AMD's single card approach for 2 GPUs granted users some key advantages over traditional Crossfire configurations by requiring fewer PCIe slots and fewer PCIe power cables, in addition to eliminating motherboard support for Crossfire, which is something that reviewers of the time noted. Regarding AMD's newfound plan of attack, Anandtech reported, quote, "So does AMD's approach invalidate NVIDIA's big monolithic GPU strategy? Not exactly. While it is true that 2 RV770s can outperform a single GT200 in many cases, you could also make the argument that 2 GT200s could outperform anything that AMD could possibly concoct. 3- and 4-way Crossfire scaling isn't nearly as good as 2-way. AMD's strategy makes sense for AMD, but it's fundamentally no different than what NVIDIA is doing. AMD is simply targeting a different initial market and scaling up or down from there," end quote. Early marketing for the HD 4870 X2 heavily pushed Crossfire Side Port, a new technology planned to release with the card, with AMD claiming it increased the total interconnect bandwidth from 6.8 GB per second to 21.8 GB per second, a massive increase. Tech Report explained how it was supposed to work, reporting, quote, "AMD says the side port is electrically similar to PCI Express, but is simpler because it's only intended as a peer-to-peer link between GPUs. This link augments the bandwidth already available via the X2's Crossfire Bridge Interface, CFBI, in the diagram, which is only used to pass final frames from one GPU to the next for compositing, and its PCI Express lanes. The side port connection should help improve performance in cases where multi-GPU applications have typically had performance scaling problems, such as when texture synchronization between the GPUs becomes a problem," end quote. Despite its initial marketing, AMD disabled the feature at launch due to minimal performance uplift despite increased power requirements and costs for AIB vendors, as reported via Anandtech. On the card's release day, PC Perspective noted, quote, "The current plan is to offer a software update for the card that will enable the technology for better performance. The problem is that AMD is allowing board vendors an option to include the sideport technology or leave it out for a cost savings. This means that there'll be some HD 4870 X2 cards on the market that'll be able to use sideport technology and some that will not. Distinguishing between the two will be nearly impossible unless the card vendors explicitly indicate their card's status, end quote. As far as we could tell, AMD never enabled sideport with driver updates, and ultimately abandoned the technology after its HD 4800 series launch. At that time, it would also have been in the fight for its life as a company. The big challenge with dual GPU cards is that if you have a lot of memory between two GPUs, it doesn't mean one GPU has all that memory. So if you've got 48 gigabytes on the board in total, but it's 24 per GPU, although still useful, it's not like you have a single contiguous pool of 48 gigabytes of memory. And that was true back here too, where GPU A can't use GPU B's memory on this card if GPU B isn't doing anything useful with it. So that's always been a challenge for these dual GPU solutions. Now, the performance of most dual GPUs is also largely dependent on driver support, which is kind of shoddy, and whether the game or the application knows how to utilize both devices. So despite their intrigue and really a lot of the desire to make these types of cards good, because it'd be awesome if you could have obviously a dual GPU card and then you put two of them, now you've got 4 and 2 slots. Despite all of that, they've just never been common, and they've become even less common over time. The first multi-GPU cards that we could remember were 3DFX's Voodoo 2 and Quantum 3D's Obsidian 2 X24, both released in 1998. It wasn't until around 2006, with NVIDIA's 7950 GX2, that they really started to pick up steam. The dual GPU trend would remain for the next decade or so, on and off, with the HD 4870 X2 launching amidst the height of the trend. Two of the last dual GPU cards we can remember from that time are NVIDIA's GTX Titan Z and AMD's R9 295 X2, both released in 2014. NVIDIA also, earlier than that, had the GTX 690 in 2012. Since then, most dual GPUs have been restricted to workstation cards like AMD's Radeon Pro Duo cards, Huawei's Ascend 300i Duo, and Maxon's Intel Pro B60 Dual. Now, getting into trying to use it, unfortunately, that is where we ran into the big problems. We could get the card to boot in a separate slot as long as video was put out by something else. The system recognized the card and even powered it on in various platforms we assembled with different operating systems in our attempts to boot with it. But the card had issues putting out display and also had issues getting drivers installed onto the system. Additionally, any attempts to force install the drivers, last officially supported on Windows 8, would crash our system and even corrupted the operating system on multiple occasions. Although in some instances, like the Windows 8 9.1 version, nothing of value would be lost. The engineering sample that we purchased from a viewer did arrive with some relatively minor shipping damage along the PCIe bracket. It doesn't really seem to be enough to affect the card's functionality in any way. It's just the metal that was affected that we can see, but maybe it explains some of the display troubles we ran into if there's some underlying damage we can't see. We did try a lot of things to get it to work. So we tried Windows 11, Windows 10, Windows 8 varying versions, and experimented with PCIe bifurcation support, checked on the support on the motherboard. So that's another interesting challenge of these dual GPU devices, is you're taking the PCIe slot, and you're basically splitting it in two. Each GPU is gonna get 8 lanes if you're on a BI 16, and that will also require some form of logic for the motherboard to do that. So we checked all that stuff, and we just could not get this thing to work. Maybe it was an engineering sample for a reason. It turns on, the fan spins, that's about it. All right, so now we're gonna take apart the RV770 engineering sample. We'll start with kind of a walk around of the card to see what the design looked like. Really simple stuff. So this is a longer card with a standard height PCIe slot, so they're not protruding past the slot here. They were running a blower fan, and that's just gonna push the air straight through over both GPU cores and out. That would mean that this one runs warmer, which it would do anyway because it's further back, but also it's gonna get the heat dumped on it from this core. The rest of the cooler design, I mean, this is about as bad as you can get in terms of thermal design, even back then. But if they were designing these to be stacked multiple in a system, then blower is still the best way to do it, just because if you've got another card right here, there's no room for the axial fans to bring air in and cool the heatsink. So the big question is gonna be, whether this is 2 or 4 gigabytes of memory in total, because 2 is what it should be, but GPU-Z was showing this as 4. We think it's a software issue. If this has 4 for real though, physically, then that would have been another reason maybe this was an engineering sample. So we'll start with actually disassembling it now. I'm gonna track these on the mod mat, which if you wanna grab one of these anti-static mats we make, they're on store.gamersnexus.net. There's a grid here. We're gonna be tracking the front and the back screws as I take them out, just because sometimes these engineering samples, they have different types of screws in weird locations. So we got Phillips 1. Let's go around the whole back plate first. It's interesting to see the fat capacitors externally. All right, that's a good start. This is better than the MSI card I just took apart in the CyberPower pre-built review, where that card used a plastic backplate. This is at least metal, so this is aluminum. They're sinking into this. Not going to do a whole lot, but since there's memory directly on the back, there's nothing else cooling it, which is going to be a challenge to keep the heat down on those. So they need to do at least something, and this is kind of the bare minimum. So we've got 4 modules for each GPU. There's going to be some on the other side as well. So these are debug LEDs. That might be unique to this card because in engineering samples, they'll often put additional LEDs or hookups. There's some unoccupied 4-pin connector spots on the PCB here. Over here, there's Captain tape covering 2 dip switches. So that's going to be unique to engineering card. They're labeled 1 and 2, and they say on and KE. Those would have been used for something in the debug and engineering process. Let's get the cooler off. Need a smaller driver. Definitely not fully, that is not fully torqued. I'm not sure if that's because someone else took it apart before us or if they just didn't assemble it all the way. So these are spring retention, which is pretty much how it's been done for a long time with GPUs. And then there's just some plastic bumpers here. These are probably to prevent a short, so those are just going to stop the bracket here, which is most likely steel, from bridging any components on the board. I'm wondering if the dip switch enables or disables one of the GPUs. Oh. So this specific module isn't in the data sheet. It's really close though. There's 4 that have the exact same character string, but then 1 or 2 letters are changed, which might just be to do with pre-production versus production. So the format seems to match the 1 gigabit modules. There's 8 bits in a byte. That would mean if there's 4 on this side and there's 4 on the flip side, that'd be 8 total modules per GPU, which would be 1 gigabyte per GPU, which is what we would expect. This is supposed to be a 2 total gigabyte card, 1 per core. It does detect as 4 in GPU-Z, but unfortunately it looks like we do not have a gold mine of memory right now in 2026 on this card. But I think we've seen enough here to confirm that, so now I'm going to take apart the rest of this. Ooh, that was a little crusty. Hey, look at that. That doesn't look like a good quality copper. Yeah, we've got thermal paste applied to 2 GPU cores. This is pretty cool. Is that a PLX chip? That might be a PLX chip. Yeah, so this is a PLX. This is a multiplexer for PCIe. So this is what allows the 2 GPU cores to share their lanes through a single PCIe slot. These were expensive. I don't know what they cost at this point in time in history, but the last time I looked up the price of these, like cost, they were $30 to $50 at the time. It was when they're really in demand for specific applications. The IHS for this is larger than the GPU silicon. Then we've got our other 4 memory modules per core here. So that's going to be 8 total, front and back. Same memory. So that is going to be a 2 total gigabyte card. And then for the rest of this, it looks like they've maybe changed some caps or moved some things around. So between these 2 power connectors, if we look at the reference images on Tech Power Up's website where they have some board shots, this region looks different. So that may be unique for the engineering sample here. I'm actually not sure what this is. I'm gonna have to look that up. I might look that up. Let's look up oh, it's VTech.
Honda. Variable cam timing.
Is that what that is?
E-Tech, yeah.
Multi-phase SMD coupled inductor. No, it's a coupled inductor.
That's
Okay.
not right.
That's not, yeah. Ron, Honda. Oh, apparently these were best known for use on the 4850 and 4870s. I'm just looking at some datasheet entry for it. So it's a coupled inductor. It's part of the VRM. If you look straight down here, those are going to be the inductors themselves. So it looks like it might be a group of, I don't know, 3 or something, maybe more than that. But that's just a big fat inductor that's all grouped into one thing. That's kind of cool. I haven't seen that, or I haven't seen it in a long time if I have. Oh, another coupled component. Yeah, that's another one. Oh, nice, plastic. There's plastic in the thermal pad. That's good. That'll conduct. So this is going to be 3 FETs to the 3 inductors in the coupled inductor. So without probing it directly, it's probably a 3-phase, and then we've got a +1 over here. Maybe that's for memory. It's possible that this is for memory. One of these is going to be a controller, one's going to be for memory. There's another 3 phases over here. That is probably for the other GPU. All right, so this is pretty easy. We're just going to see if it says anything on the die. It does, nice. All right, let's see what it says. ATi. Sight for sore eyes. There's the ATi logo. So this says diffused in Taiwan, made in Taiwan. So they were already doing stuff there. It does say engineering sample 0818 ENG. And it's a B3 stepping, whatever that would have meant for this particular card. So that's cool. This should be just the same exact thing. This might be the first paste it's gotten in 20 years when we redo it. So same thing, just twice flipped. And rotating it like that would allow them to kind of rotate the memory and the VRM and everything so that they can just mirror them. This has some very orange copper heat sinks. Normally that's not a great sign. That can be an indicator of plating. In this case, I doubt it was copper plated, but some crusty paste. There's your heat sink. We're gonna go through and just pull the shell apart to look at what the fin stack looks like inside. Good use of thermal pads. They've got a large thermal pad right in the middle. That would have been contacting that PLX chip. That's for the fan. 10. They really wanted this held together. A couple things. First of all, they drove that screw right through the memory contact patch, the heatsink. So a little bit of lacking coverage there, but steel screw doesn't really sink that much heat. This is an aluminum base plate. This is a kind of traditional sign. Look at that. Look, right, it was perfect. Again, you can grab your mod mat on the store for moments like this. Aluminum base plate, there you go, that's not bad. They've got some fat fins here. That's gonna help with the PLX, so that is sitting right on top of the PLX chip. They did get warm from what I remember. I don't know what the power was for them, but thermal pad to it. And just as a reminder, that's what that looks like. So that larger square pad contacts that PLX chip in the middle. This is gonna help sink the heat. Wider fins will reduce the resistance as you're pushing air through the tighter fin stack here and then the tighter fin stack here. This is those pins we were looking at earlier, so those are gonna help with memory. There's a little bit of contact directly under it to some of the MOSFETs, some of the memory, some components like that. Blower fan, and otherwise this is all they were cooling it with. This thing would have run pretty hot. So this was also in an era where AMD and NVIDIA weren't shamed enough yet to really improve the cooling on their GPUs. So that's gonna be it for the history lesson on this unique ATi AMD card right after AMD bought ATi, before they kind of shuttered the brand, and before one of AMD's worst moments in its history financially. After this would have been Bulldozer, Pile Driver, Steamroller, all of those CPUs before the Ryzen launch in 2017 and the AM4 launch in 2016. So this was sort of, AMD was doing okay, and they managed to buy ATi. That was a big acquisition, but then they hit the 2008 crisis. Not a good time for AMD, and NVIDIA was much smaller at that time. So historically, really interesting point in time for this card, because this came out like just before massive drops in AMD's stock price and before AMD had to do a lot of cutbacks, which is why I think you see some of the technologies that were supposed to be in cards like this never really coming to fruition because they probably made a bunch of cuts to their tech ambitions and just went towards sort of trying to survive through the 2008 crisis. So really interesting stuff. So that's going to be it for this one. If you have any other older GPUs or CPUs or anything you're interested in where we could do a historical recap plus maybe a teardown or something, and if we can get it working, which unfortunately we couldn't get this one to actually run anything successfully without a major crash or corruption or something, but if we can get it working, let us know what kinds of parts that you're interested in from older eras. We'll see if we can get them or if we already have them and maybe do a history breakdown of it and some testing. And otherwise, if you want to see more like this, check out our 3DFX Voodoo GPU that we looked at previously. That one was handmade by someone who salvaged GPUs from 3DFX that were never officially released. We'll link that below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersaccess.net to support us directly or patreon.com/gamersaccess, and we'll see you all next time.